Welcome to the Walt Weekly Podcast with your host, Walter Latham Sr., and co-host, Michelle Sweeney McCombs.
Hello, this is Walter Latham. I am the host of the Walt Weekly Podcast, and I'm joined by Michelle Sweeney McCombs, our co-host. And after a couple years of trying to find a guest for our topic today of how to become a professional pilot, we finally have succeeded, and we have on the show our guest, special guest, Christopher Jones. And we would like to thank Christopher Jones for joining the Walt Weekly Podcast. And hello, Christopher. How are you?
Hey, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good. Michelle's doing good, and we're happy because we managed to achieve a goal, and we had a goal of having a black pilot on the show for a couple of years, and we were unsuccessful until we approached OBAP, which is OBAP is the acronym for.
Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals.
Excellent. Yes, and they stepped in, and we have Officer Christopher Jones with us.
Yes. I was just saying, welcome, Christopher. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
y'all. Thank y'all very
Yes.
much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Before we start, I do want to just give a brief intro for Chris. All right, Christopher. I know you had a fascination with flying since you were a little boy. I know when I used to lay down in North Carolina on the grass and look up at the sky, I would see these jets and the contrails, and I wanted to be a pilot since I can remember, because I was always at awe at those guys that could do that could fly a plane. And you have succeeded in doing that. Anyway, Christopher, just to give a little background on Christopher, Christopher had a fascination with aviation from an early childhood. And your grandma, after church, used to take you out to Charlotte Airport on Sunday, your grandmother. And she would encourage you by proclaiming, son, you can do whatever you want to in this world. And my grandmother was the same. So you're fortunate. I'm fortunate. We both were raised by grandmothers, I guess, I have to assume. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, my mother and my grandmother, I was raised by both of them. And I didn't, I did grow up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that was actually where I got the bug. Typically, I don't know exactly what day or when it was that I decided that I wanted to be a pilot, but my grandmother would take me and nurture in order to nurture that. She was like, "Well, I tell you what, we'll go out to the airport after church, and we'll just stand on the observation deck of that old Charlotte Airport terminal, and we will watch airplanes go in and out." And back in those days, there were what we call jetways, which people walk down the jetway nowadays. They don't go outside, but they didn't have those at that terminal. So you could actually see the people step out of the terminal, walk up the stairs, and then board the aircraft. So that was always really, really interesting to me.
How exciting was that for you as a child?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome, and I came from a single parent home, didn't meet my father until I was 21. And so, I typically grew up, kind of in a stereotypical, predominantly black neighborhood where I didn't have a whole lot of exposure to aviation. And so my grandmother, like I said, was very forward thinking and encouraged me to pursue that dream of flying. Because I was so enamored and so fascinated with these airplanes, my grandmother was a nurse. She had come from the sharecropping era, and she eventually became a nurse. And so she said, I'm going to take you on an airplane ride. And so we went up to Washington, D.C. to see my Aunt Doris in Washington, D.C. in about 19, in the late 70s. And so that was my first airplane ride. And my grandmother also said, "Tell you what, I'm gonna let you meet the pilot." So before we found our seat, we went to the cockpit of the aircraft or the flight deck, and I got to meet the pilots, and they sat me on their laps and they showed me all of the switches and the buttons, and I was just hooked from that day forward.
Or I believe
And
you.
so, yeah. So that was just the world to a 5-year-old kid, you know. So that was just so awesome.
At that age, everything is huge, because
Yes, yes,
you're
yes, yes.
mesmerized, exciting, and just a wonderful
Absolutely.
place to be at that age, learning that early.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I see that, Chris. I see that you enrolled in the United States Air Force shortly after graduating from high school,
Yeah.
and subsequently they assigned you as an aircraft mechanic, right? Where you quickly learned to appreciate the value of higher education, and that I guess that led you to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. All right, where you got your flight ratings and was commissioned as an Air Force officer. Yeah, why did you have to take that route going into the Air Force? It, why did you pursue being a pilot, a jet pilot, or something to that effect?
Well, I had no idea how to become a pilot because I didn't have a whole lot of money. We didn't have a whole lot of money, and of course, my mom and my grandmother again stepped in and said, "Well, I know that a lot of pilots come from the Air Force." So obviously that zoned me into that, and so I joined the Air Force right after high school and became an aircraft mechanic, a hydraulic mechanic. And it was then where I think one night I was working and passing, I mentioned to my supervisor in the Air Force, one of my night shift supervisors, that I wanted to be a pilot. In passing, there wasn't even a topic of conversation. And his name was Nelson, Staff Sergeant Nelson Navarro, and he paused me and he said, "Well, wait a minute. What did you say? You said we're mechanics out here, but you want to be a pilot." And I said, "Yes, absolutely. That's been my childhood dream." And he said, "Well, he said he had a question for me." He said, "Well, what is the question?" And I said, "Yeah, well, what is it that you want to do? You want to be a pilot?" I said, "Absolutely. That's my dream." And he said, "Well, what have you done to achieve that goal? What is it that you've done to achieve that goal?" And at that time, I could tell y'all I did not have an answer for him. And he looked at me and said, "That's not the correct answer." He said, "That's the wrong answer." He said, "I'm going to come down there and we're going to learn together how to do it." So that's where I learned about private pilot licenses and instrument ratings, certified flight instructors. That was a point that I learned that. And at that time, too, I also learned about Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University during the research period when I was coming up through the Air Force. And of course, aeronautical stood out to me. And I said, "Well, I tell you what, let me get the catalog and let me take a look at the courses that they're offering." So I opened that book up. It was a book then, and I opened that book up, and some of the courses in there were aerodynamics, aviation weather, aviation physiology, and it was. I said, "This is it right here. This is where I'm going." So I decided to go get out of the Air Force at that time. It was that point that I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. When I saw the catalog at Embry-Riddle, I said, "That's where I'm going. This is the school for me." I went down to visit. I said, "This is where I'm going." And I got out of the Air Force shortly after that. I just severed all ties with the Air Force at that time and went back to Embry-Riddle to go to college full time. And it was interesting because right about that time period, my grandmother, who was about 70 something, decided that she wanted to go to college and
Oh,
yes,
Amazing.
went to Howard University initially. And after she had retired from being a nurse, and so right about that time, she was looking at me like, "Okay, well, now what are you doing? What's your problem? What are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going too." So that was another inspiration. I said, "I am going to go. If she can do it, I most definitely can do it." So I decided to go back to college full time at that point.
Incredible.
And
Okay.
so then shortly after that, then I came back in as a maintenance officer in the Air Force.
Okay. That was in the Air Force Reserve that you did that?
It was actually active duty. It was active duty Air Force, and I initially obviously wanted to fly. I wanted to fly in the Air Force. I now had a degree, and I wanted to fly. And I took the Air Force Officer Qualification Test, AFOQT, and I did not achieve the results to be a pilot. My scores, I think you needed something like a 50, and I came in about 30 for being a pilot.
Wow.
Even though during that time at Embry-Riddle, I was in flight training. I was actually flying an airplane, learning how to fly an airplane, but I did not get the scores to be an Air Force pilot. And so the Air Force said, well, you could come on active duty and you could try to take the test again. And so that's exactly what I did. And I got the score, but then something else happened. It was another issue with me trying to get there, which was they told me I had to serve a certain amount of time in my current career field before I could apply for pilot training, the Air Force pilot training. And I was coming up on the age limit for being a pilot in the Air Force.
And what was
So
that?
the age limit for being a pilot at that time was about 25.
Oh,
So, and
Really?
so,
Wow.
yeah, 25. So, I was coming up on 25, and I think I was about to turn 26, and before I could get all of the paperwork together, then you know I had missed the age cutoff. And I asked, were there any waivers? They told me at that time there were no waivers they were giving out, and so I was like, well, all right, then now I'm going to have to figure out a different path, And the Air Force, I actually did get a scholarship at Embry-Riddle to help pay for my tuition. But so I owed the Air Force another commitment. So I did win a scholarship indeed, which helped me to pay for some of my schooling. Coming back on active duty, I had to find another path. But when I was on active duty, I had my flight ratings from Embry-Riddle, some of them. And so I continued to push them out while I was working as a maintenance officer. I continued to add on additional flight ratings. I'd work during the day, fly during the night on active duty in the Air Force, on the civilian side. In
right,
other words,
right,
so
right.
I
Okay.
would do like, fly in a 172 or a twin engine Seminole aircraft to get all the way up to certified flight instructor. I did all of that while I was working full time as a maintenance officer in the Air Force.
Okay. Now, I want to go through the process, all right, from beginning to end. And I know right now you are a professional pilot, airline pilot. You fly the Boeing 737, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you're active. You are active. You are a pilot, and uh, I would like to know, especially for underprivileged kids, what's the process? I mean, you explained the route that you took. All
Right.
right. How would underprivileged, let's say you got a kid, an inner city kid, he's 18 or whatever. What is the process, from thinking about it, start taking courses? I mean, could you explain to us what that process would be?
Right. Well, the cost of attending flight training is astronomical. And I think the first thing that you have to do is you got to figure out a way to gain the money. I mean, there are a lot of programs and organizations such as OBAP, Women in Aviation, that offer scholarships to kids such as inner city kids or low income kids like myself who didn't have the resources. Like I told you, the military was the way I came about mine, and I got a lot of financial aid while I was at Embry-Riddle in order to achieve my dreams. But there are a lot of camps, like OBAP hosts an ACE Academy every summer, and they take the kids up in an airplane. And they give rides around the pattern and all those types of things. It is really a high barrier to entry, unfortunately. And now what's happening is, since there's such a shortage of pilots, the airlines themselves are chipping in, and they're creating these academies, such as we've created an academy um, to help young kids and young adults to overcome that barrier of entry with financial resources. So they have these academies where they chip in the money, and sometimes they can win about $5,000. It costs about, to come all the way through right now, is costing about $50,000 plus in order to achieve that. Now, if you go to a full-time university such as Embry-Riddle, like I did, or you know Delaware State, I know, is a HBCU, and they have a flight program, then you're now eligible for such as things like Pell Grants and
Right. That's
and
your
loans,
traditional.
right?
Right.
Traditional routes, which will help you to offset some of that cost. And then, of course, there's always loans available um, for that to help you
Okay.
as well.
Okay.
But the first thing for inner city kids is, one thing you cannot teach is motivation. So this is a career field that will weed you out quickly, because it's such a long process and such a high barrier to entry. And so it's one thing, each student, regardless of their background, they have to be motivated to do it. It has to be in their blood, because it will weed you out. Because you'll find that you don't have any money or very little money. Recall eating grits and beans for lunch sometimes. As I was coming through my training, but yeah, the goal was still there. And the motivation was still there. So yeah, so those are some of the ways today, currently, that we have available to inner city kids. We have OBAP has a host and a variety of programs that can help offset that barrier to entry.
Okay. Now, were those now we can talk about cost and accessibility, but are there any other barriers? Because I'm taking a look at the stats, and I went and did a little research on this, a lot actually. To be a commercial airline pilot by race, I saw a breakdown of that. I think it was published by Riddle. White. Now I'm talking about pilots in the United States. All right, airlines in the United States, and whites are 86.5%. Hispanic or Latino, 7%. They got an unknown here, 2.5%. I don't know what the makeup of that is. Asian, 2.2%. Black or African American, 1.6%. And followed by the American Indian or Alaska Native, 0.2%. But we are 1.6%, representation of pilots in the United States airline industry. I do not understand that. What would you say the reason is, besides the cost and the commitment? But I'm sure there are a lot of kids. I mean, kids growing up that want to aspire to be a pilot.
I think
What do you
also,
attribute that to? Just the
um,
barriers?
can I say something real quick?
Yeah,
So
please.
I think also, if you have responsibility, a family, if you're married, also, the years that it takes is, apparently it takes longer to become a pilot than it does a doctor. So I experienced that with my ex-husband, so I know it took him a long time. But I didn't realize they had an age cap on there, like you said, 25. So he actually became a pilot, before he was 30, I believe. No, maybe not. So it took a long time. So that could have a lot to do with it too, if you have a family and you need to feed your family alongside with the expense of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I would agree with that. I think though, when I mentioned the age limit, I was actually talking about the Air Force specifically at that time. I think now the age is 30
Hmm.
for the Air Force, but I believe the real true reason that that number is so low is I think simply because of exposure. I've gone and talked to many kids in many classrooms, and a lot of them say, I never even thought about that. I've never thought about that. And
Right.
then sometimes when they look at the astronomical cost of it, then it just seems like it's out of reach and unattainable, and so that might obviously change some people's minds right there, you know. And so I think it's really, really, you know, a lot of us, that us 1.6% to 2% of black pilots, the more we get out here and the more we start talking to some of these kids and to so that they can see pilots that look like us or look like me in the uniform, then I believe that's kind of what will trigger some of that interest.
Right.
And then once we do that, then we help them find the resources, the financial resources available to achieve the dream. Like I said, it's got to be something that's in your blood that you can't do without. It
Right.
has to be because it will weed you out. And even if you have a family or even if you're married, no matter what your life circumstances are, you can still do it.
Right.
You just have to be able. You just have to get in here, and the first step probably is to look and see what kind of scholarships are available for
Right.
you know uh, Air Force ROTC scholarships like I had, the GI Bill if you're military,
Right.
right.
aircraft owners and
Hmm.
pilots associations, Sisters of the Skies, all these organizations, including OBAP, Women in Aviation and 99s, all these have scholarships and are available for that demographic. And like I said, in even some of the airlines, like I said, have started their grooming pilots in these academies now. So
Okay.
that's one of the things that one of the ways you could do it. But even then, it's a lot of studying, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of math and science, physics, and so
Not easy.
you, yeah, it's not the easiest thing, academically either.
Right.
And for me, you know, there were, there was a lot of I had a lot of setbacks. I had a lot of jobs that I started that I couldn't finish because one reason or another, some of the learning, or sometimes it was a slow process of me learning it, and I had to go back and redo it, and I had to go back and reapply. And, so there's a whole lot of adversity along the way as well. You have to take a whole lot of check rides, you have to do sim rides, and
Hmm.
all these things may weed out some people.
I,
That's
you know, I
true.
was. I think that we were talking about, the student that would pursue a career in aeronautics. All right, and specifically being a pilot, and that 80% of them wouldn't make it, would drop out. Only twenty
Right,
percent would succeed.
right,
All right, and I think that would just reinforce what you just said, right? Is that it's hard. You
right.
got you got other commitments. There's a lot of time. You got math, science. Well, I'm a strong advocate of the STEM program. For us across the board. All right, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. That's where we should be focusing on. I'm a strong advocate of education, and I mean, both my granddaughters. I mean, they're in the STEM program because I want them to be positioned, for these type of opportunities. So another thing too, I want to talk about real quick with you, Chris, is I was looking at boycott, the pilot boycott a few months ago. And I think that was what due to working conditions or something like that. That y'all guys were boycotting.
Yeah, some of the airlines now, because some of the pilots have been, picketing just because they're trying to increase the work conditions. Because after COVID, traffic really rebounded a lot quicker than the airlines had anticipated. So that actually pushed your flight time up and your time away from home and all that. It pushed that way up because they were trying to maximize and trying to, accommodate all of the passengers that kind of came back real quick. And so, a lot of the pilots were picketing because of that, and they were trying to get the working conditions and the pay to, to equalize the amount of work that had been put in. So that's what that was about.
But what I observed is that the picket line at JFK, all the pilots were white. And, I took them, I'm saying to myself, my goodness, there are no blacks. There are no black pilots out there on the picket line. They're white,
Yes.
Not enough. They
And,
just want to keep their jobs.
well,
White
I
people
mean,
got more to risk. We don't have that much to risk when it comes
yeah,
to
but
stuff like
if
that.
you're in a union, and I'm sure that the pilots are in a union, am I correct, Chris?
That's correct. That's correct. Most pilots are part of Airline Pilots Association, ALPA.
Yeah. So, that would cover you right there, but there's just none out there. And like you said, Michelle, maybe they didn't want to take the risk either, So,
Right. We get treated
you're keeping
differently
your
when
head.
we step up. Yeah, we get treated differently when we step things. So the white man would have more
Absolutely.
opportunity to do a little more picketing, rioting than we do. They're not as at risk as
Right.
we are.
Right. I understand what you're saying with that. And
Yeah.
I think that, since it's so traditionally white and male, it is so traditionally entrenched white and male that, they just kind of go par for the course when it comes to working conditions and trying to, you know, better them and everything. And so, um, yeah, they're typically, you don't have a whole lot of black periods, black pilots, I'm sorry, to begin with. And so when it comes to any type of labor action, it's really highlighted, how few there are.
There are various types. Flew on air taxi, or air charter, or air ambulance. You flew in Afghanistan, all right, serving, I guess it was one of those need programs. What do you call those?
Yes, it was a
NGOs?
humanitarian.
Yeah.
Yes, NGOs, absolutely. And as far as my career is concerned, I talked about kind of how I got there and how I started, and how I didn't have a whole lot. At some point in my career, I figured out that I really love my passion is flying, but I love helping people too. I love using my passion of aviation to help people. And so this was like a marker moment in my career. It was called Air Serve International. It was totally humanitarian, non-military, and I was over there for 4 months flying a King Air 200, a Beech King Air 200, which is a small corporate turboprop. And indeed, we flew several organizations such as CARE, Feed the Children, World Vision. We flew all of those types of organizations out to remote villages in Afghanistan with food and supplies and people to work those villages. And those places were not accessible by road. And so I found that my job and the way my career has played out is that I have truly been plugged into the humanitarian scene. And that, that air serve came about because I participated in Angel Flight at one of my universities. It spearheaded uh, Angel Flight is a organization where people in need who need free transportation, air transportation to get treatments in different hospitals. That you would donate an airplane, you would fly a small airplane, load the passenger on board, and take them to the place that they need to get their care. Well, that absolutely I just love that so much that I looked into air ambulances. And that's how I ended up at Med Center Air, which was an air ambulance. And a lot of people are not familiar with the aircraft. They know that air ambulances have helicopters that can land on scene and transport patients to the hospital, but they're not familiar with the airplanes that actually do the same thing. But they take passengers longer distances to different hospitals to get the care that they need. And so that was just that was those were marker uh, times or marker jobs in my career that kind of set me on course to be, the type of pilot I am. I move a little different. I'm not like necessarily at the largest airline. My airline is Alaska Airlines. And Alaska Airlines, interestingly, is the only airline. A lot of people are not familiar with Alaska's, particularly on the East Coast, but the name suggests that they started in Alaska, and that's where they started. And they did the same thing since 1932. They've been flying people they've been serving people out in remote villages and in communities and bringing food, supplies, and medicine. And to this day, they are still a major lifeline to that state.
That's amazing.
And that is why I am at Alaska Airlines. A lot of people say, well, you can go to some bigger airlines. What about Delta? What about United? What about American?
Hmm.
Well, I said, no, I'm good. I'm really good. I think I am where I'm supposed to be, because at the end of the day, it's about purpose and why you do what you do, particularly if you've had the adversity that many of us have had, such as myself. So why am I doing this? It's not just so I can make a whole lot of money and be this rich man. We want to make a great living, absolutely. But at the end of the day, what is your legacy? What are you leaving? And and that is why I've chosen Alaska Airlines, because I love the purpose that is behind it. We're an airline like everybody else. We go to New York, to LA, to San Diego, to Seattle, and like those places. But Alaska is the mission. It's the state. It's where we were born. But Alaska is more like the mission now. A
You're
lot of
serving the
people,
community, serves the community.
serving the communities,
Hmm.
serving the communities, many of whom are native up in Alaska. So I love that. I love being part of that mission. It's so much bigger than just me. And I just feel like it's my obligation to bring some people with me and to help serve and to make everybody else's life better with my passions, my God-given passions and talents. I just believe in that wholeheartedly. And if that means I have to commute across country to do so, then so be it. Then that's what it'll be.
That's
But
amazing.
that's just I just feel so strongly about that. And like I said, I'm really blessed to be where I am. So, you know,
All right, all right.
That is
Eh,
awesome.
We talked about what it takes, to accomplish the objective of becoming a professional pilot. All right, and the cost and the time, but show me the money. I mean, what do pilots make?
well, pilots' salaries range anywhere between, well, now that's really gone up, but I would say from the flight instructor all the way up to the wide body captain at a major airline. So that range is anywhere between $40,000 per year to $500,000 per year.
Right.
So in all pilots, all professional pilots are somewhere in that range group. And so you make a good living. You make a great living at doing it. And like I said, it's just really a blessing to be able to make a great living and to be able to help and bring other people with you, and to bring and to help other people along the way. And
I,
so
I got a question about that also. I'm sorry. Do you
No, go ahead.
find that
absolutely.
there's any racial discrimination in reference to positions and salaries?
It is. I don't think that really is the case, because the salaries are hard stone written in a contract. So once you get in, your salary is what it is. They don't really, you don't really negotiate a salary per se when you get on with an airline, because that salary is already hard written in stone by contract through the unions. And so
That's
they
good.
and every so often, every 3 years or 4 years, we go back to the unions go back to the negotiating table, and they renegotiate new salaries and new work rules and the pilots who are there vote on that, and that's what implements the contracts with each airline. And each airline has their own contracts, which has a few things that are different. Maybe our airline might be better on this side, or their airline might be better on that side. So it's really not really based on something that you negotiate like that.
Okay.
Awesome.
I was fortunate enough to fly Pan Am, and they had a flight. I think I mentioned this to you in our pre-planning for this podcast, that they had a direct flight into Monrovia, 9.5 hours. This is Pan Am. And I got to spend time because they had a layover in Monrovia, Liberia, right? So I got a chance to spend a lot of time with the flight crew. All right. And they flew the 747. Okay. 9.5 hour flight, 747. And could you tell me, the 747, the international versus the domestic flight? Okay. That's where that salary differential is, and how do you earn that top level? Now, would you consider the long haul? I guess they call it the long haul flights. That would be a long haul flight versus a domestic flight. What is that seniority driven? How is that, or how does that work?
Yeah, it and obviously depends on your airline. Now, the big airlines such as American, Delta, United all have wide bodies, and typically when a pilot is hired by an airline, they start off on the smaller airplanes, unless there's somebody like Southwest, which they only fly 737s. And we are also the same. We fly 737s, and we have a small number of Airbus A320s, which are the narrow body airplanes. So Southwest and us, we don't have wide bodies, but the big airlines have wide bodies that fly the long haul routes that you just mentioned. And so when you're hired at, depending on which airline you're hired at, you work your way up to the wide body, the international wide body stuff, if that's what you prefer. Some pilots are happy flying domestic, like myself, and flying for a different reason. And some people like the international wide body long haul stuff. And so if you like that, then you would apply to American, Delta, and United, or FedEx or UPS, which are cargo companies. And those companies will fly those international wide bodies. And that's who will actually make the highest. So you really,
They
the
make the most
salary,
money, though, right?
right, right.
Right. Okay.
They make the most money because of you can kind of say the larger the airplane, the larger the pay scale at
The
those
paycheck.
companies. Right. There you go. So and then at the same time, the longer you are away from home, or whatever. So there's some good pros and cons with that, but that's who makes the highest as far as the international wide body guys. The hourly rate is the highest on those aircraft.
Another question I have for you, Chris, is
Mm-hmm.
all right. Now, I'm a big fan of Top Gun. That's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Okay.
I have to admit it. I mean, that's the best movie ever made to me because I have such a love for flying. Okay.
The first one or the second one? The first Top Gun or the second Top Gun?
Well, the first one was awesome, but they were both
I
good.
like the second one better.
Okay. All right. All right.
All right. The only thing is that if I'm gonna be in Top Gun school, I'm gonna be number one. I don't like being number two.
Okay. Okay.
I'm Maverick.
Okay.
That's the way I look at myself, which is just hey, you got to set a goal, otherwise, you're lost. That's the way I look
Right.
at it. All right. Now, going back to certifications on different types of planes. All right. You flying a 737 for each step up. Let's say I want to fly the 767. I think that's that's not by Boeing, right?
It is. It
It
is.
is
It's
by
both.
Boeing at 767.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do I have to wait X amount of years before I could, say, okay, I want to fly the 767. I mean, because from what I can understand, and based on what I've read and what you told me, is that a lot of it has to do with seniority. I look at seniority and number of hours and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
All right. But now let's say, for instance, you want to just say, okay, I want to certify for 767. Could you do that based on, how would that work?
Yes, again, like I said, depending on your airline that you choose that you want to fly, if they have the 767 on their property, which I think Delta United still currently fly that airplane. If you and I think now, since there's such a need of pilots, you can actually get hired to fly the 767. I know you could do that at both of those airlines, and so you could start off flying that airplane. And then if you say, I want to fly something even larger, then you can also do that. You can bid to fly that airplane, and it is based on seniority. So if they have a slot, they have slots available at their airline that they need X amount of 767 pilots, then you bid into it. And if your seniority can hold it, then you are a new 767 pilot. And then you have to go through the training. Each airplane that you fly, you have to go through a training once you get up to the airline level. So a 737, an Airbus A320, a 767, each one of those airplanes, you have to go through about 2 months of training in order to fly each one of those airplanes. And so,
Okay.
yes, you can hold that. If your seniority allow you to hold it, you go right on in there. Or if you have to wait and fly something like a 737, which isn't the smallest airplane in the world either, but if you want, you may have to wait on that airplane in order for them to have a slot to fly, say, a larger airplane such as a 777 or A350.
Okay. Okay. I know. Yeah. I'm going back to the Pan Am flight crew. They were telling me back then, this is in the 80s, I guess, and they were telling me that the DC 9, was it a DC? They call it a Death Cruiser. I know you
Yeah,
probably heard of it. That the DC 9?
yeah, that's a DC-9, DC-10s, McDonnell Douglas.
Yeah. Yeah. They used to call it a Death Cruiser. And I was wondering whether, but that's been decommissioned now, that plane, right? Or do they
That's
fly it?
Yeah, that's mostly now a cargo airplane. They don't really fly them as passenger airplanes anymore. The DC-9s or the MD-80, which was a later version, a later, longer version of that. Um, Now, the only time you can see anything that looks maybe like a DC-9 is the 717, the Boeing 717 now, because McDonnell Douglas was acquired by Boeing. So that's all now one company, and everything is a 7-1 something or 7X something at Boeing. So the 717 actually used to be a smaller, what we call an MD-95, and that's what and I think Delta and Hawaiian Airlines still fly that, and it looks just like a little DC-9, but it's just a lot more technologically advanced than that. So those airplanes have been indeed retired, but those are the only
Okay.
passenger DC-9s you can find at this time.
All right. Well, another thing I do want to congratulate, and I was reading this yesterday, that Delta, I believe it's the Delta Airlines, hired their first female pilot. Did you read that?
No, was it
Female,
was it,
black female. What's she? Black female. I think she was a captain or a pilot or
yeah, yeah. I think I know who you're talking about. The second to become a captain at Delta, who is an OBAP colleague, or all of us are OBAP colleagues, but
right.
there are two black female captains at Delta, I believe, um, at this point, and they just hired their second one, if that's who you're referring to. And
Yes. Yes. Yes.
yes, yes, I know that young lady. She is an awesome, awesome young lady, and she is setting the world on fire. So
What's her
we're
name?
really her name is Anya.
Anya. Okay.
Yes,
I figure the audience may want to look up because we do have
yes,
a substantial amount of female listeners. So
yes.
yeah, Anya. Well, all they got to do is just Google
Right, right,
Delta, first female, not the first, but the second.
right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I do
So,
also want to. Yeah. Go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead. Well, since you brought up young ladies, women, there's I think at this point there's only like less than 150 black female airline commercial pilots out of about 70,000. So there's an organization now called Sisters of the Skies that was formed by a group of black female aviators who now they have come onto the scene and they are trying to mentor young women of color to pursue this career. And they are an outstanding organization. Every year they have a benefit gala and they have scholarships as well. I can also tell you that in my particular airline, Alaska Airlines, we just hired our fourth black female pilot out of 3,500. So you can see that we
Okay.
still got a lot of work to do across the gender lines as well, as far as, you know, hiring hiring young sisters to be pilots as well. So that I just think that organization is also stellar, stellar, and I have nothing but good things to say about them.
All right. All right. I do want to, and as a way of wrapping this up, because I think we're pushing against the clock here a little bit, but OBAP, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks on behalf of Michelle and I and the Walt Weekly podcast to OBAP, the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. And they've been in the business for 47, not when I say business, they're nonprofit, but their mission is to help minorities become part of the aerospace industry. And they've been out there for 47 years. And I would just like to extend our appreciation, because without them, we would not be doing this show. And I would like to, especially Linda Wackerman.
Yes,
Yes, Linda Wackerman. Special thanks to her. A special shout out to her and the organization. Okay,
That's
and
awesome.
uh, and yes, that is very awesome. Chris, I tell you, thanks a lot, man, and best of luck.
and I just like to leave with a few words from Charles McGee, one of the Tuskegee Airmen. You know, the 4 P's of being pursuing aviation: perceive your dream, prepare, perform, put your plan into action, persevere. Most importantly, persevere and don't give up.
Thank you.
Amen.